Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on what time you're watching this. My name's Connor from 905 Review. You guys are checking out our series, Give This a Spin, where I recommend you some of my favorite albums. And today we have St. Catherine's own Alexisonfire with the final album from their original run, Old Crow's Young Cardinals. Alexisonfire is a post-hardcore group founded in 2001, with their name apparently coming from the website of an adult film actress, Alexisonfire. You learn something new every day. People took notice of the band's live shows in no time, and they'd be picked up by the newly established Distort Entertainment, founded by Greg Bello, a manager at EMI, giving the band pretty good connections early on. With Distort, they would release a self-titled debut album, which saw the band grow their following, leading to a tour with fellow Canadian rockers Billy Talent and Death from Above 1979. They followed this up with the 2004 release of Watch Out, and while neither album put up spectacular numbers, let's say, they did help the band gain a devoted following, at the very least in Southern Ontario. Their 2006 album Crisis saw the band's first legitimate commercial success, debuting at number 1 on the Canadian Albums Chart and being certified platinum within a year. This was the highest point the band had seen thus far. So where would they go from here? This next album opens with the first of its titular tracks, Old Crows. The group takes a little bit of time setting a scene here. The bass line offers some stability as these sharp guitars chime in occasionally, but before long, we get going with a pretty sweet riff. And soon enough, we see one of the most admirable aspects of Alexisonfire being the stark contrast and yet simultaneous harmony between the harsh yelling voice of George Pettit and the more soft melodic voice of Dallas Green. And here the two of them slap you in the face with a reality check. We're not the kids we used to be, so stop wishing for yesterday and embrace today as it is. Embrace today for what it is. But I mean, let's not get too motivated yet. Let me at least keep you for another 10 minutes or so, and then you can go do whatever. We follow this up with the second half of the album title and its lead single, Young Cardinals. And this was my first exposure to Alexisonfire after the song was featured in the video game NHL 10. And I mean, speaking of, did you know I made a visual playlist of all the best songs featured in NHL video games? It got absolutely nuked by copyright, but you can still find it on Vimeo or just audibly on Spotify for your own convenience. But here it's as if society's gone too far. The guys just want to revert back to our most basic instincts and needs, in this case just being jealous of birds and their innocence. It's one of the group's biggest hits, with the single being certified gold, and probably one of the best examples across this album of that two-singer vocal dynamic I mentioned earlier. Closing the first side of the first record now is Sons of Privilege, and we're taking a bit of a shot here. With Canada being significantly less populated than the United States, the US has a huge influence over Canada in a variety of ways, but maybe one of the most obvious is through media. As a matter of fact, there's even regulations in place to try and maintain Canadian culture and arts as best as we can. One example that comes to mind being that radio stations have to play at least 35% Canadian artists, which is something I've even taken the liberty of doing the same in terms of artists I've covered on this channel. And while I do agree that's a good idea, the result, at least in terms of music we hear on the radio, is a lot of the same one-hit wonders over and over. So here the boys have grown sick of it, hearing about the States day in and day out, on top of the obnoxious Americans that are out there who believe their country is the single greatest on the planet in every facet imaginable. And it is worth looking through the lyrics to see how a lot of the world does view the United States, but at the same time, those obnoxious people we're talking about, they tend to be hopeless to reason with, and, given whatever most credible info you have, they'll just assume you're jealous that you're not there. All in all, Pettit and Green don't want to be one of the many average, everyday Americans who are essentially enslaved by the sons of the lucky few who are able to establish big businesses in the country's early days and just survive off of old money. Opening the second side of the first record is a fast-paced personal fave of mine, Born and Raised. Admittedly, I don't know much of the band's personal lives, but the lyrics read like somebody who was raised religious and then lost that faith at some point in their life, as a lot of stuff can be debunked by science, but then at the same time they're still clinging to hopes of certain things, such as having a nice afterlife, just considering how much with the world really is going downhill. And man, Dallas fucking kills the pre-chorus and chorus in this. Segueing right into a back-to-back banger, next is the heavy No Rest. It feels like this should be the band's battle cry. I mean, it really is an anthem. Looking back at a lot of the shows touring to promote this album, they would open with Young Cardinals, which I understand, that makes sense, but me personally, I probably would have picked this just because it's them saying they're ready to take on the world. And this song really resonated with me because it was telling me that I can push through whatever it is I'm doing, such as back in the day working 2 jobs simultaneously, regularly doing over 60 hours and thinking, yeah, this is a sustainable way to live. So to end the first disc now, we have The Northern. He comes, just so severe, 7 trumpets beat. And I'm surprised to learn it's actually an interpolation of an old African-American slave song, Roll Jordan Roll, which does of course explain the title, as obviously they wanted to escape up north to the Union. As can be said for much of the album, the vocals here are top-notch, especially Green singing that he wants to go to heaven. That always hits, and even more so now knowing the backstory to the song. Keeping that slower pace to begin the second disc now is the 7th track, Midnight Regulations. It's an ode to the everyday, ideally middle or lower middle class worker, those who need financial support but are just above the threshold to qualify and are kind of stuck in that struggle there. And I feel the song only rings more true today. I mean, look at how exponentially the cost of living has grown recently compared to how minuscule the increases in rate of pay have been. Continuing out of this next is Emerald Street, where the band hits close to home. The song addresses the state of Hamilton, a nearby big city to the band's hometown, where they would also frequently record. And if you've been around the area, you've probably seen the downtrodden bits of the city. And again, like the previous track, this one is almost more important now, as just recently, almost 15 years later after this album's release, the city declared a state of emergency regarding the homelessness. We sit and watch the stacks on fire to the east across the bay. All the boys in the halfway houses wave to the girls of Emerald Street. To close out this record side is Heading for the Sun. And it's us. We're heading for the sun for all our ill-advised actions. And the lyrics are just vague enough that I feel like they could represent a variety of different things, but with the early lyrics being nameless children of a generation lost and old minds in power trying to force out old ideas, you immediately think of the residential schools that the church forced Canada's native people into. But the final verse about the earth coiling and how it'll soon be set ablaze feels a lot more to do with global warming and going back to that nameless lost generation that could of course refer to the people who are going to be born towards the earth's end of time and have to deal with the mistakes of generations and generations before them. Granted, the song could cover multiple issues at once, and just tying it all back to the number of people in power throughout history and how evil they've been and just their overall lack of empathy. And down to the home stretch now, we have Accept Crime. Taking a stance against religion again, if homosexuality or premarital sex is a crime, then it's time to accept crime, because you know what? There's no police between two beating hearts, and we should be free to do with our bodies as we please. I hate to say it because of what a great message it is, but unfortunately this probably is my least favorite song on the album. Just shouting hey or counting like 1, 2, 3, there's stuff that you find often in pop music, so it kind of starts to border too much into that territory for my liking.
Say hey, there's no police. Hey, there's no police between two beating hearts.
And closing out the album now with its slowest song is Burial, as the organ from the northern returns. The wintertime is often seen as depressing, and the two get compared quite often, and let me tell you, in Ontario, the winters are long. So here the guys are just wondering, when's it gonna end? Old Crow's Young Cardinals is available on CD, cassette, and vinyl, the last of which actually contains 2 bonus songs, being Wayfarer Youth and Two Sisters. Wayfarer Youth calls out to all the young anarchists out there. Tear down borders, tear down the government and the system. I personally don't agree. I mean, I think we need some stability in life, but even still, a decent tune. Two Sisters is much shorter than everything else here at only 1.5 minutes for a pretty quick but good one. Upon the album's release in 2009, there were 2 special versions, one containing a red and gray vinyl, and the other containing 2 black vinyls, but this alternate artwork that's the same on the poster that came with mine, though limited to only 70 copies. They followed this with a gray smoke release in 2018 and a clear splatter in 2021. Old Crow's Young Cardinals might be Alexisonfire's most popular release, earning reviews from numerous music critics, as well as being the band's most successful on the US Billboard. It would also be the band's last studio album before they regrouped with 2022's Otherness, as Dallas Green was really struggling with the newfound success of Alexisonfire, as well as his own solo act, performing under the cheeky moniker City and Color. As I may have mentioned, I love Old Crow's Young Cardinals and much of Alexisonfire's discography for the vocal chemistry between Pettit and Green. I mean, the vocals alone are worth listening to this album for. But that's not to say that the instruments here aren't great, because they do a solid job creating the band's overall sound. On top of that, it's just one damn consistent listen. With everything considered, I'm going to stamp Old Crow's Young Cardinals with an A- grading, but boy does that border on A territory. It's just, when I look at this album and I ask myself, is this undoubtedly an A? Unfortunately, the answer is no. And I think I really do just have a soft spot for this album, but that could very well just be that Alexisonfire is the pride of the area. I had my eyes peeled on this record for quite some time, never having any luck finding it, and it got to the point where I eventually did see it on some record store in Australia's online shop, and once everything was said and done with shipping, I probably paid like $80 for this. And then, of course, within a couple months, I see them start popping up around here. But you know what? I don't even regret it. Anyways, that wraps up my thoughts on Alexisonfire's Old Crows, Young Cardinals. Let me know yours. And as always, I appreciate you tuning in. Until next time, my friends. But, real quick, before we take off, what were your thoughts on Old Crows, Young Cardinals? Did I rate too high? Did I rate too low? You let me know down below, as well as anything else you might have to say, anything you want to share. And I hope to see you in the next one. You take it easy.